All right. Hi, everyone. So we have one more lightning session round on open science policies. I'm Kathy Zeiler. I'm from the School of Law at Boston University. And our first speakers, we have 4 talks, 30 minutes. I think we're going to do 5 minutes each, if that's possible, and then have time for questions. So first up is Malgorzata Lagisz, who is a postdoc at the School of Biological Earth and Environmental Sciences at University of New South Wales, and she's going to present on what research awards have to do with open science.
Okay, so animations are gone, so it's going to be about carrots, and carrots are roots, so it's going to be about roots of some potential issues in science. And so awards are more than carrots. Okay, they bring prestige, they bring funding, jobs, and lots of attention, like from the other researchers, but also general public, like Nobel Awards. Everybody knows and cares about Nobel Awards. But yet, if you watch the news, you will notice that there's a big diversity problem in these top awards for whole career, big achievement, big professors, so basically top of the crop. And the problem is that certain people get these awards more often than others. So this year, there was in science, there was only one female scientist that got it from all of them, okay? And similarly, most of those awards go to researchers from well-resourced, developing Western countries. Okay, so something is wrong, and this pattern comes again and again if you look at other top-tier awards. Yes, probably in your discipline as well. Plenary talks, all those things. Okay, it's kind of changes a little bit, but so there was lots of attention paid to these top late career awards, but actually we should look what happens earlier. So at mid-career and what happens at early career. Who gets those awards and why? And hands up if you don't know about the Matthew effect. Okay, there are a few people. So it's from the Bible and it's about rich getting richer. If you have a good start with lots of resources and you have success early on, it will bring more success. So you get these early career awards, they look good on your CV, you are more likely to get a job, you are more likely to get funding, you are more likely to produce more good research. So that's what Matthew effect is all about. And because there was so much work done on late career awards, and we know they are really badly biased, we decided to look at the career, at the awards that are available to early career and mid-career researchers. And also what they have to do with open science. Actually, awards are a great opportunity to promote open science practices. Would person who publishes non-transparent, non-replicable research should really get these awards or not? And is it part of the assessment criteria for awards? So we've just completed a small project in my field, which is ecology and evolution. So I will share what we did and what we found within 5 minutes, or less. So we looked at 11 best paper awards, so for best published article, usually given by a journal, and 13 best researcher awards, which are usually awarded by societies. And we focused on general ecology and evolution journals and societies because we thought those will be the most prestigious and most representative. So we didn't look at specialized stuff like, you know, lichens or fungi or maybe fly research only, but general ecology evolution. So everybody could apply from our field, potentially, okay? And we ask questions like, do criteria that are there, and eligibility criteria and assessment criteria, do they foster equitable access and assessment? Are they transparent? And the answer was not really. So actually, when we provided several scores and several like more detailed questions, but most of the time they are really vague and very rigid. And how, if they actually foster equitable access and assessment, how do they do that? And what we found is actually most of those awards have eligibility cutoff. So for example, up to 5 years of PhD, you can apply for them. And more and more awards actually have this flexibility now, phrased exactly saying, for example, 5 years, but if you had career interruptions, you can write about it and will extend your eligibility. And they also allow self-nominations, not all of them, but it's not bad, actually. And when it comes to the question about open science, it looks really bad. There was only one award, and it was an award from the Society for Open and Transparent Research, so they obviously cared about this. And nobody else. And we also looked at the gender bias in the list of past award winners. And what we found actually a long time ago, which means for me it's like 20 years, there was huge bias towards males, or male names at least. And in last 20 years, and especially last 10 years, the situation got much better. There is almost 50-50 female and male names. So that's actually a good news. Okay, so what's next? So we decided to expand this project to cover all disciplines. Ta-da. And what exactly we are planning to do? We will focus on best paper awards because it's going to be really big. And we will cover all 27 subject areas. So journals are classified by SciMago into these 27 categories. And we will get the top ranked journals or societies that rank those journals and look whether they award best paper awards. And we will also evaluate the access, assessment, transparency, open science practices, and winner biases. How are we gonna do it? How am I in with time?
You're out of time.
Oh my God. Okay, so I'm just going to invite you to the hackathon, which is on Wednesday, and it's a collaborative and open project. Everybody can join. We have this in person. After that, we have virtual hackathons, which will be joined by people from all around the world. We have some people already signed up. So flexible with time. And after that, we just work asynchronously, communicating online, collecting data, analyzing data, and writing up. And both my contributors from the past and current project, they already done amazing work with me, and they are diverse in all sorts of terms. And I acknowledge other support. Thank you, and talk to you later.
Very good. All right, next up, we've got Alejandra Manco, who is at the Université Claude Bernard Lyon 1. She's going to present on open science policies seen from the perspective of researchers' communities from afar.
Hi, my name is Alejandra Manco, and I will be presenting this lightning talk on open science policies seen from the perspective of researchers' community, which is a part of my PhD thesis about the effects of open science policies in the careers of researchers from the basic science. As everybody knows, open science is gaining traction worldwide with open science policies enacted on institutional, national, regional, and international levels, especially over the past 10 years. As for empirical research, Babini and Rovelli have examined policies related to open access and open research data in Peru. As for the Brazilian case, Resende, Nabadal, Oliveira, Ribeiro, and de Oliveira Santos, and also Babini and Rovelli have done extensive work on the regulatory frameworks of open access and open data as well. The aims of this presentation is to find out about researchers' opinion, perceptions, and experience with open science policies concerning knowledge production processes from researchers from Brazil and Peru, and also to provide an overview of how communities of researchers from the basic science, especially three fields, physics, chemistry, and biology, visualize open science policies, meaning their opinion and discourse on this subject, and whether their knowledge production processes have changed, and how open science policies have had an impact on on their research products. In order to do so, a qualitative approach using semi-directed interviews was used. 12 interviews were conducted. Each interview lasted around 1 hour. The interview samples include researchers from both private and public universities in the case of Peru, and public universities in the case of Brazil. It is worth noting that most of the interview people are men, and this is especially true in the physics area. Data collection for the interview corpus was made in different stages. First, using the ranking QS of this year as a guide, the top 20 universities of each of the two countries were identified. After this identification process, scientists were contacted and interviewed if they agree. After interviews, transcription were analyzed using the NVivo version 12 software, and the coding process was made using an inductive category development approach. As for the preliminary results, in contextualization, I think it's worth noticing that the research cultures in both countries are very different, even though they are both in Latin America. These research cultures are molded by the hosting institutions and their values, meaning disciplinary ethos and also country settings, and even competing mindsets. Even though there is actually collaboration between the two countries, and also several researchers from Peru have studied in Brazil, so there is quite a large network, contacts and collaborations still happening. Still there is large differences. For example, some laboratories have an emphasis on publishing only positive results. There are also a difference of what is considered ineffective research, which is translated in funding allowances. And for instance, in some institutions, basic research is not doesn't have a direct practical application, therefore it's considered less useful by the funding agencies. And finally, concerning researcher ecosystem and the relation to industry in Brazil, industry seems to be more intertwined with basic research, as there are projects funded with industry funding. As for transnational and transdisciplinary issues, it's worth noticing that there is actually a rather vague idea whether there is an open science policy in the institution or what it contains. As for the moment, there is no change in preferred format for dissemination of results. Journal article is still the preferred communication format, and this is possibly due to the fact that national evaluation systems are still taking into account mostly articles as the most valid and prestigious output. And there's also no formal change in the routing work.
This went over about double time, so we're going to just stop it there. You get the basic idea. And next up is going to be Aidan Tan, who is a medical clinician and PhD candidate at the University of Sydney at School of Public Health. He's going to present on prevalence and characteristics of data sharing policies across the health research life cycle.
Hi, I'm Aidan Tan. Today I'll be talking about the prevalence and characteristics of data sharing policies across the health research life cycle. The in-principle support for data sharing is strong across major stakeholders. However, despite scientific and ethical imperatives, the in-practice commitment to sharing data is low. In a recent study, We found 4 in 5 principal investigators support the concept of data sharing in principle, but only 1 in 5 commit to sharing data in practice. This of data sharing is dictated by data sharing policies. Over the past few decades, data sharing policies have been developed and implemented. Our primary objective was to determine the prevalence and characteristics of data sharing policies of major stakeholders, specifically funders, ethics committees, trial registries, journals, and data repositories across the health research lifecycle, specifically funding, ethics, registration, publication, and post-publication. We included the 55 largest public and philanthropic funders by annual health research expenditure and the 55 largest private funders by annual health industry research and development expenditure. We included all national ethics committees. We included all clinical trial registries, which were a primary registry or data provider. We included the 5 highest impact peer-reviewed scientific journals by journal impact factor for each of the 59 fields of clinical medicine. We included all research data repositories in clinical medicine. Each of these stakeholders, all official websites, online reports, and great institute information sources were reviewed by 2 independent investigators for the presence of a data sharing policy. If a data sharing policy was present, its magnitude of support for data sharing was assessed by whether it mentioned, recommended, or required data sharing. And if it either recommended or required data sharing, its characteristics were assessed. A total of 935 major stakeholders were included: 110 funders, 124 ethics committees, 18 trial registries, 273 journals, and 410 data repositories. More than half of funders either recommended or required data sharing. Funders more commonly recommended or required data sharing if they were a private pharmaceutical and biotechnology funder in a high-income country or America. 4 ethics committees recommended data sharing. All ethics committees who recommended data sharing were from high-income countries. 1 trial registry recommended data sharing. This was a primary registry in an upper middle income country in East Asia and Pacific. Almost 2/3 of journals either recommended or required data sharing. Journals which either recommended or required data sharing had a lower median 2022 journal impact factor to other journals. Few data repositories recommended or required data sharing. The institutions responsible for data repositories which either recommended or required data sharing were more commonly responsive to technical matters and from East Asia and Pacific or international. Data sharing imperatives were not met by most stakeholders. When data sharing imperatives were met, many data sharing policies provided little to no guidance on the studies, data, and documents to be shared. The exceptions to share data, timing of being shared, the people to share with, the purpose for sharing data, and distribution of shared data. While 4 in 5 private pharmaceutical and biotechnology funders recommended or required data sharing, 2 in 5 public funders recommended or required data sharing. Data sharing policies by health research funders which require data sharing have a large effect on facilitating data sharing and are associated with a high degree of compliance. Funders, particularly those distributing public money, should leverage their influence by requiring data sharing for all research they fund. This would minimize research waste by preventing duplication of data collection activities and maximize research utility by supporting timely secondary use of data and prospectively planned management of data. Despite the importance of ethical data sharing and reuse, only 3% of ethics committees recommended data sharing. Sharing of data generated by clinical trials is considered an ethical obligation because trial participants have put themselves at risk. However, this ethical obligation is often not met. Ethics committees, who often consider whether proposals for data sharing meet ethical and regulatory standards, are an untapped resource to increase data sharing. Ethics committees which recommend data sharing of research that they review could strengthen the social license and public acceptability of health research and support the production of high-quality data sets. Including data sharing statements as a standard part of prospective trial registration records has been an important first step towards establishing data sharing policies early on and transparently in our trial's life cycle. 5. Plan to annotate, curate, and preserve data. There is potentially scope for trial registries to take the next step and recommend data sharing. Initially, this could be simply as endorsement of the concept or practice of data sharing on the part of the registry. But ideally, to actually facilitate data sharing, the registry should stipulate what this means and provide guidance on how this can be actioned. trial registries, which recommend data from the clinical trials they register to be shared, would expedite the validation of research and synthesis of evidence. Almost 2/3 of peer-reviewed scientific journals either recommended or require data sharing. There is scope for more journals to move from recommending to requiring data sharing. Journals which require data from articles they publish to be shared would enhance transparency of findings and confidence in results. There is likely a limited role for data repositories to recommend or require data sharing, although those that do sharing and improve data governance. There is, however, likely a larger role for data repositories to facilitate data sharing by improving the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of data. In conclusion, there is room for most stakeholders to strengthen their support for data sharing by recommending or requiring data sharing. There is also room for most data sharing policies to guide investigators on the implementation of their recommendations or requirements. This could be facilitated by developing, adopting, and implementing data sharing standards to support the timely reuse and replication of research and strengthen the transparency and reliability of studies. Thank you for your time.
And last up is Deborah Apthorp. She is a cognitive neuroscientist at the School of Psychology at the University of New England. She's going to present on the Data Badge Project. Do badges encourage computational reproducibility?
Wow. Okay. I'm actually just going to click on this link here, which would take me to my, how do I just hide the panel? Oh, yes, there's a screen. And then we can just, can we full screen this? Yes, we are. Great. So do data badges encourage computational reproducibility? And this I've also put as co-author Sophia Krull, who couldn't be at this presentation because it's like the middle of the night for her, but she is first author on this paper. So I want to give her some credit, particularly since she is a PhD student still. So this is kind of I've actually written these slides in the spirit of open science and open data. I have actually put these slides in a public link. This is a QR code for that, or you can just type in bit.ly/databadgeproject and you'll get to the slides. They're written in Corto. So you can also see the code for them if you want. Corto is a relatively new instance of Markdown, sort of like our Markdown. All right, so how did I get, this is more of a personal journey of how I got involved in this project and what happened and how it transpired. So it all began with this tweet by Nick Brown, who I follow on Twitter, who I was following on Twitter at the time, I still do. He called for volunteers to help with a project. And this was based on the fact that all articles in the April 2019 issue of Psychological Science, the journal, had earned an open data badge. And that was the first issue in which this was the case. And Nick thought, oh, let's go and see if we can reproduce the published results. What a great idea. I think he initially thought he would do this himself, and he quickly realized that that wasn't going to be possible. So he tweeted out, and all of us nerds went, yeah, sign me up. So I signed up, of course. It's now a preprint, but I'll just go through what happened and how we did this and snags that we came across along the way. So the final team consisted of 12 researchers. We had a few extra who signed up in the beginning and realized that they had overcommitted. And we had a few extras come in at the end to tidy up and help reproduce some of the articles that couldn't be reproduced by the right number of researchers. We had varying levels of experience from PhD students upwards to full professors. So each paper was allocated to at least 3 people to try and reproduce the results in the paper. We communicated via Google Groups, which worked pretty well, actually. And that sends email digests, and so it was pretty easy to organise via that. And the first stage, we all went off independently and did our best to reproduce the papers. I'll be interested to see how many of them people think we would be able to reproduce. So who would vote for 50%? Who would vote for less than that? Okay, yeah. I was optimistic. I thought we'd be able to more or less reproduce about 50% of them. That didn't turn out to be the case. So anyway, in the first stage, we just went off by ourselves. We didn't, well, in the end, we never actually contacted the authors, and that was a deliberate choice because we wanted to see whether these papers would be independently reproducible. Anyway, we uploaded our first attempts to the OSF, and then we wrote the phase 1 report. So each person wrote a report on what they did in their replication attempt. And this is the eventual team. These are the people that we worked with. That's just where we are. So I just wanted to go through my experience. So I was initially assigned 4 papers to work on, and that was mainly based on having access to MATLAB, because not all institutions have institutional licenses for MATLAB. So I could code in MATLAB, and some of them had actually shared MATLAB code. All of the articles in the that I had been assigned had data. In fact, all the articles did have data, so at least there's something there. Not everything had code. Of the articles I was assigned, actually the easiest one to reproduce was the one that didn't have code, because it was a very simple analysis. That one took me maybe 2 or 3 hours. Another paper took me more than 2 days, full time, to try and reproduce the results. And in the end, I wasn't able to fully reproduce those results at all. So this was the one that was easy to reproduce. It was just very simple ANOVA analysis. The other article that didn't have code had very, very raw data that obviously had come straight from some sort of repository where the data was collected and didn't. So I had to sort of go from scratch and summarize, and I still couldn't get the results that the person had published exactly, although they were very close. So clearly there'd been some sort of data cleaning that wasn't able to be reproduced. So yeah, the 2 that did have code weren't really any easier. And that one of them had so much stuff that actually you couldn't download it, which was an EEG paper. And the raw data just was too big. So that's a lesson in the fact that not every type of data can be uploaded to the OSF. So that's an interesting data curation problem too. So then after we'd done that, we did the phase 2 reports. But we didn't start these until each paper had at least 3 phase 1 reports. Then we got together on Google Groups and talked to each other. I ended up working on a 5th paper because there'd been some dropouts on the team. And we communicated via these threads in Google Groups. And then we wrote these summary reports collaboratively on Google Docs for each of the papers. And then we also agreed on ratings for each paper. So how reproducible were they? Exactly, or essentially, partially, mostly not, or not at all. And we did those both for our individual replication attempts and our view of how the three or four people who had replicated that paper were able to reproduce it. And these are the results. We had graphs, but the reviewers didn't like them, so we ended up with tables instead. So these were the individual ratings. And on the right-hand side, you can see the modal ratings. So you can actually see that there was only one paper that was able to be exactly reproduced out of these 14 papers in this issue, which is a bit disappointing. Although there were 3 more that were essentially reproducible, at least by the modal ratings. So this is the group rating. So this is how we rated the group's ability. And you can see there are 3 that were essentially reproducible, 1 that was exactly reproducible. And even that one, there were some package dependency issues, interestingly. Many were mostly or partially or not at all reproducible. A disappointing amount of them were really not at all reproducible, which was kind of sad. So what did we decide? Do badges work? Not really, just on their own. While it was a valiant attempt, and I think it was a great initiative for Psych Science to do this, there was some toing and froing with the editorial team about whether they had required code, because their policy actually said, and this was quite forward of them, that both data and code were required, but there was some discontinuities in different parts of where the authors submitted, and so nobody seemed to have really checked whether there was code or whether the code worked. So journals who are offering those badges could provide a bit more support for the authors to say, well, these are the things, this is your checklist, this is what you should do. These are our exact criteria. They need to be very clear and explicit. Do you need the code? Maybe you don't need the code, depends what the objective of sharing the data is. If you want just to reuse the data, perhaps you don't need code. But if you want to be able to reproduce the results in the published paper, you really should have code of some sort, even if it's only SPSS syntax or something like that. Do you want the raw data? Do you want the summarized data? At least you should have a README to say which bits of the data are what. So someone should check that. But the question is, who should check that? Should the journals do that? Could the authors do that and then provide evidence that they've independently checked their code? If you are sharing data encode, I highly recommend that you get someone else who's not in your lab to run it, to avoid later embarrassment. I haven't always done that myself in the past. We're all getting better at this. Another thing you could ask is journals could require that service. Sorry, journals could provide the service via the editorial staff or via peer review. As a peer reviewer, I have sometimes checked code, but obviously that's time that I'm giving for free. So perhaps journals could do that with the lots of dollars that we pay them for publishing our papers. Another recommendation that I haven't put up here, but I think is coming, is you should containerize your data encode. So you should do it in Docker or R environment or something like that. That's something I'm still learning to do. But even the papers that were very reproducible had some package dependency issues. And so if you're using something like R, you can actually have it in a container that keeps everything, including all of the right versions, and that makes it more reproducible as well. Yep, and that's it. So we've now had this accepted in psychological science. We were very surprised that it wasn't rejected. It got generally positive and constructive peer reviews. After we revised it, the reviewers were happy, but the editor insisted on several more rounds of changes, and you will see when you see the published paper what happened, because there's now an editorial note attached to it, but it's been accepted, so that's great. And hopefully we have some time for questions.
All right, we're now into the lunch hour, but I maybe take 3 minutes or so for questions. Once we get this resolved, just turn it on. All right, there we go. All right. Yeah, please. Yeah.
How do you decide on whether reproducible or fully reproducible? And for the second part, did you come to any difficulty when trying to do, like when you're not sure which software or which technique to use, whether that was a certain way, judging whether the result you obtain is similar enough to what the author.
So the question was, sorry, the first part of the question was, how do we decide whether it was partially or fully reproducible? That was basically, so we discussed that a bit, and if something was exactly reproducible, you had to have produced exactly the results that were in the paper numerically. So, you know, to 2 decimal places or whatever. So, you know, is the t-statistic the same? Is the p-value the same? Are the degrees of freedom the same? And that was our criteria. And so, like 1 or 2 of them had a type. We didn't count typos, I think, but even so, yeah. So it was just simply, were the numbers that were in the paper the same as the numbers that we got? So yes or no, basically. And if they were mostly the same, you know, then that was, you know, essentially, say there was a typo or 2. But if you only could get some of the results, or if you could get maybe half of the results and not the other half. Say someone had reported that they did a regression, but they didn't give you any code for it. Wasn't clear which variables they used, that sort of thing. So that's to answer your question for that part. And the second part was, sorry.
If it's reproduce a result that is very close, but not exactly the
right.
same, and it was the end case when you suspect it might be just because you don't have the full knowledge of what's wrong.
Yeah, that actually didn't vary. That's an interesting question. So the question was, if something was slightly different, how do we know whether that was the software or something? What was very interesting is that many of the team used different software to do the stats. So some of us used R, some of us used JASP or Jamovi, some people used SPSS, and in the main, everyone got the same results, which sometimes weren't the same as what was in the paper. So we didn't actually get much difference regardless of whether we used different software. Sometimes someone had made a slight mistake and they could see that when they saw other people's code and were able to fix that. But yeah, interesting, we didn't get much in the actual stats that was different with the code. There was some cases where I got more than other people got because I was willing to spend more time on digging and fixing. In the MATLAB code in particular, there were people would call functions that weren't in the folder and you'd have to go and find that function, or they'd call things that weren't really necessary, so you'd comment that line out. So I did quite a bit of hacking that other people didn't do. So I was able to get closer to some of the results, some of the papers. So some of it was a bit dependent on how much time you were willing to spend, and we weren't required to spend that much time. I'm just kind of I'm just very perfectionist and I like to get that stuff down. You can actually go to the OSF and read my code if you like as well.
Maybe one more question, let's break for lunch. Yeah, please go.
I have a question for Moshe. So Moshe, you talked about you had self-nominations as being something that listed that I think you were listing it as something that might improve the equitability of awards. Although I have in some contexts seen, like in some contexts, like within universities, for instance, seen where self-nomination seems to add a certain different sort of bias. You know, like the sort of person who self-nominates is maybe not necessarily, that's not creatively distributed across the population. So I wonder what you think about that. I mean, like how do you deal with that sort of self-nomination? Good? Is it bad? Is there a way to make it good?
Carefully and depends on the context and how actually that will start. Because you also have nomination bias. Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah.
So it could go both ways. But imagine that scenario where you're at home and you have some students that don't have that kind of mental so like that. And they think they do an amazing job anyway. And if they cannot have nominate, then something to try. So I think having both of school that they are people think about, for example, the effect of the prestige of the nominator. Yes, how to exclude them. So maybe nominations that people who are nominated by big professor have a better chance to get the word than people who are nominated by somebody from a very university. So in that case, having everybody that's nominated by explicitly encouraging everybody that's nominated, like even if you are minority and if you are in a university, you will look just at the quality of the work. And that's what matters. So please go, and nominate them as checking the good work. So recognizing the right good. And not many of us are doing that.
Yes. All right, so one last big round of applause.